if any three of us or our girls had known about there was something actually, suicide prevention charity were a thing that they could have reached out to, maybe, just maybe, one of them would be alive. And that just maybe, I'd take that right now. I would take that.
And on our big thing today, we want to talk about how we can best support young people going through tough times, and some faced with suicidal thoughts. I'm delighted today to be joined in the studio by three men whose daughters all took their own lives and are now campaigning for suicide prevention to become part of the school curriculum. Andy Airy, Mike Palmer and Tim Owen, known as the Three Dads Walking, because they've raised more than £1 million for charity through a series of walks in memory of their daughters, Sophie, Beth and Ellie. And this week, there was a debate in Parliament around their campaign to get suicide prevention on the curriculum after a petition was signed by 150,000 people. I'm also joined in a very packed studio this morning by the Conservative MP Nick Fletcher, who's a member of the Petitions Committee, who opened the debate yesterday. We'll come to you in just a sec, Nick. But first of all, gents, really good to see you. Thank you for coming in. And lots of people will be familiar with your campaign and the extraordinary work that you've done. But for those that aren't, let's go right back to the beginning. And Mike, it started with this whole sort of campaign and you coming together. It started when you lost your daughter, Beth. Is that right?
I lost Beth on the 28th of March 2020, but Andy's probably the best to begin this story because he lost Sophie about 14 months earlier.
Yeah, so we lost Soph just before Christmas 2018, and it came out of the blue, shattered our lives. She was a lovely young girl, or young woman, 29, nurse, going through a bit of a tough time in her life, but nothing spectacularly awkward in terms of the other things that other people have gone through. And so a suicide just shattered us. And it was off the back of that we were introduced to Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide. Suicide prevention charity. It was through them we discovered that suicide's the biggest killer of young people in the UK. And that prompted me to get off my backside and try and raise some money and raise awareness. So I've been involved with that for just over 4 years now. And we came... Yeah, well, that was how I got started, but then it was Mike lost Beth nearly 3 years ago, isn't it now?
Yeah, it's nearly 3 years ago, but Tim lost Emily just about 5-6 days before I lost Beth. But yeah, sadly, my youngest daughter, she was only 17 years old. She was the last person in the world you'd think could ever take her own life. She was a talented singer. She was trained to be a vocal artist. She had a huge, many circles of friends. She had a wicked sense of humour. She was loved by everyone, and she loved everyone. You know, and it's why Beth took her own life, I don't think we'll ever properly know. You know, but you know, being a father, the thing is, you bring up your children, you know, to be safe. You talk to them about sort of crossing the road, stranger danger and everything. But sadly, I never saw what was going on under my own nose. And that was my own daughter's, I think, deteriorating mental health.
Tim, just to sort of complete your story, tell us about Emily.
So Em was 19 when she took her own life, and that was 3 years ago in kind of next week. Em was diagnosed with autism when she was 15. She'd struggled for a few years, but once she had that diagnosis, her mental health improved massively. She got GCSEs, she got an apprenticeship. Everything was going in the right direction. She was working in our village pub. And the things that got her through her autism were driving a little Mini, going to the pub and working at the pub, and also going to the gym. And all that lot was denied from her as we started to cough in the house. And she just couldn't cope with it. And she took her life kind of 5 days before Beth took hers, kind of 3 years ago. And it was about 4 weeks after Em took her life that my eldest daughter came to me, and we were absolutely devastated, broken, as all families are affected by suicide. And my eldest daughter came to me and said, "Dad, I've been talking to a bloke in Manchester," which was exactly what a dad doesn't want to hear. No, Dad, it's okay. It's another bereaved family like us. And she told me about Beth, who was 17, and Mike and I ended up talking that day. And for the next few months, Mike and I kind of spoke, you know, basically got ourselves through, supported each other, peer support, which was massive.
Because, I mean, just an awful thing to go through at any time. But during lockdown...
Horrendous. Em's funeral, there were 6 people there. 19-year-old girl with 6 people. Beth's funeral, I think there were 8 people there. Mike.
Yes. Wow. 8 people.
So,
Yeah.
you know, the village that we live in, small village, 500 residents, they're all lining the streets to go out. But normally when you lose someone, that you go through a ritual after people die. You know, you have mourning, you have a wake, you have a church service. We were denied all that. Like we had a 25-minute service in the Creme. And my wife, you know, after Em died, was in my arms just crying. No one will remember Em in a year's time. And that kind of started something off. And then a few weeks after Mike and I kind of first spoke on the radio, none of us knew each other.
Yeah.
A few weeks after that, I found a note from Em, and it was probably the most eloquent thing she'd ever written about why she'd basically given up on life. And one of the things was, don't be ashamed. Well, I'd never been ashamed. We'd always admitted straight away that she'd taken her own life. And the second thing was if people can learn from me, then let them. So armed with those three things, I told Mike about it. It was like, we've got to do something, mate. We've got to do something to fight back. And Mike was telling me about getting in touch with Papyrus. And, you know, Papyrus is, you know, supports young people, biggest killer of young people under 35. I've been on a mind course, and, you know, that explains some of the statistics behind suicide. You know, 6,000 people a year-ish in the UK and Republic of Ireland. And it's like, this can't be right. All these deaths can't be right. So we started just to talk about, well, we didn't know what we could do.
And so then how did you, the three of you then, go from having these conversations to getting your walking shoes on?
Well, we were all in different places, so these two had got together, but then it was Fluke, another one of my child, and Mike, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd started doing courses with Papyrus Prevention on Young Suicide, wonderful charity that. But I was taking CIST courses, applied suicide intervention skills training courses, and suicide awareness courses. I needed to understand what had happened to Beth. I was broken myself. I fell into a suicidal spiral after losing my youngest daughter. It was absolute despair, absolute grief. But there's something in you that tells you to fight back. So I started doing courses and stuff with Papyrus, fundraising with them, and I met Andy's son Gregor, and Andy was a bit of a legend already with Papyrus because he'd started fundraising and doing stuff in the name of his daughter Sophie.
Yeah.
So it just started to link since Andy lives up in Cumbria, Moorland in Cumbria. I live in Sale, Greater Manchester, and Tim lives out in Sholdham in Norfolk. You know, it started coming together. This is a UK-wide problem.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we could walk from each house. So I took this little map up to Andy, met Andy for the first time, and basically we've never looked back since, have we?
That's one way of putting it.
I know. Yeah.
You just kept on. You just kept on walking.
Yeah.
And were you then surprised by the attention that you got, and and presumably then lots of stories and people coming to you in similar situations?
Yeah, what helped us was a friend of mine is Alison Freeman, who's BBC reporter, who I've known for donkey's years, and she'd helped me when I was doing some stuff under the Run for Sophie label. And so once the three of us got together and started to plan what we were doing, I said, I know this BBC reporter, do you mind if I told her the story? And once we did, she linked us with BBC Breakfast, which obviously then raised our profile massively. But then just in the run into the first walk in 2021, the day before we walked, Daniel Craig donated £10,000 and allowed his name to be put forward.
Yeah.
And that was the week after the last Bond film was released or something like that. So at the time, he was the highest profile film star in the world, which just meant the media interest in what we were doing just exploded. And
in fact, I think we've got a clip because he's sent you a video message. This is Daniel Craig.
Andy, Mike, Tim, just incredible. What you achieved last time around and what you're about to do now is just truly, truly heroic. I'm sending you love and my best wishes. Shout loudly. I know you'll be heard. All my very best. Good luck.
So Tim, explain when he says what you're doing now. So you've already raised £1 million for charity.
Yeah, so that was it. That message came to us at the very start of the second walk. So the first walk, it was all about raising money, all
Yeah.
about raising money. And it was only during that walk we were met by so many other suicide bereaved parents and siblings and stuff, and none of them knew that suicide was the biggest killer of under 35s. So by the time we got to the end of the walk, the first walk, it's like, right, we've got to do something about this. It's not just about raising money, it's about let's try and do something proactively. Let's try and prevent those suicides happening. So we got this idea about putting suicide prevention in the school curriculum from Gregor, who'd just been through school and said it would be a really useful tool to have. And if this is the biggest risk facing our young kids, let's train them about it. And it just seemed to make sense. So our next walk, we sought support from people like Andy Burnham, who helped us craft the petition. And that message you got from Daniel Craig was at the start of the second walk. And unfortunately, it was just as the Queen had passed away. So the second walk was quite heavily disrupted. We'd already started writing the petition, but it hadn't been through the petitions committee. And so the second walk, the idea of that was to go between the four nations of the UK. The first walk between our homes, we got written to by a doctor, a GP from Edinburgh, saying it's a problem across all four nations. Please highlight that. So that was our little, how can we do that? Let's walk between the four kind of seats of power across the United Kingdom. And that was Daniel Craig wishing us luck ahead of that. So,
ahead of doing that.
Yeah.
It's really, Mike, when you talk about these lessons, what do they actually involve? What's the sort of thing that you're doing? Because and how do you, because presumably it's a very sensitive thing, because what you don't want to be doing is telling people who hadn't thought about it before to start thinking this is something to be interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to remember what we want taught on the curriculum is suicide prevention. So it has to be done age appropriately, it has to be done sensitively. You know, when it's introduced, there's all sorts of ideas bandied round. But basically, what I will say that, you know, sadly, we met parents who 11-year-old children have taken their own lives. In some cases, I think there's a 9-year-old. Whether this goes down on suicide in the statistics, sometimes it goes down as a narrative verdict or something like that. But they are certainly suicides. But what I'm saying is, being age appropriate and sensitive, maybe we should start, as the Princess of Wales says, with our basically early years. You start teaching kids about their emotions, how to deal with their emotions, and you build on this through school, through primary school, into secondary school, where certainly you must introduce suicide prevention. We've seen it, well, I've seen it being taught a couple of times in a couple of schools. It's not as scary when it's taught as you think, because it's a very positive outcome. A lot of the kids actually get it. You know, they're the ones who are struggling. They're the ones who want to know about it. And by giving them these life skills to keep themselves safe, you are investing in them for the future. You are making them sort of far more resilient, you know, and they'll be resilient,
And
happy people.
that's what it's about. It ultimately is. It's not even about the word suicide. It's about dealing with emotions, finding help.
Help-seeking behaviour.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what we want to encourage. You know, and this awareness should be for everyone as well, the teachers and parents and everyone. It will help save lives. We don't want other families to go through what we are still going through. It is utterly brutal. Our children are the most precious things we've got in our lives. And if we can get downstream, you know, introduce these things, be proactive rather than reactive, we'll save lives. That's what the petition's about, and that's what the debate was about.
Is there something that you each wish you'd known before, signs to look out for, or, you know, the sorts of things that the parents have been told?
I think when the whole point is that all three of us didn't know about suicide prevention charities. We didn't know about Papyrus's Hopeline UK, which is manned by suicide prevention professionals. You know, if any three of us or our girls had known about there was something actually, suicide prevention charity were a thing that they could have reached out to, maybe, just maybe, one of them would be alive. And that just maybe, I'd take that right now. I would take that. And that's all we're trying to do, to highlight to young people that there are people out there. And it's also interesting, the training that we've seen delivered gives you life skills. You know, everyone has downtimes. We're all adults. We all have downtimes. Could be your career, could be relationships go down. And to hear the suicide prevention charities delivering suicide prevention material to young people, saying, look, those downtimes, those really dark times, on average only last about 15 minutes. So if you've got the skills to get through those 15 minutes, or you can see that in a mate and you can give them the skills to get through that 15 minutes, Before we knew that, all of us had said if our girls had taken 10 seconds out, they probably wouldn't have made the same decision. If they'd just thought about what they were doing, they probably wouldn't have taken their own lives. And it's just about giving kids a second chance so they don't make that stupid decision.
Let's bring in Nick Fletcher, Tory MP. We'll talk in a moment about how this is actually going to work in terms of the government's response to the debate, because we'll hear from some of the debate. But just how do you feel as a sort of, well, as a politician, but also as a human being, listening to these stories and how they've affected you?
Oh, they've affected me quite a lot, actually. I mean, I'm a dad myself.
Yeah.
Got two relatively young children, 23 and 21. And I've just been saying to Andy on my way in here, just because of the awareness that these three dads here have put out there, it's made me check more on my children, and I think that's really important. Going home and asking if the kids are okay, but asking them twice. I always remember asking a friend of mine, "Are you okay?" And he'd say, "Yeah." No, I say, "Are you really okay?" And he looked at me a little bit gone out. What? I said, "No." I said, "You're really okay?" "Yeah, I think so." Why? I said, "Well, it's important that we ask each other. I think it's important that we ask as kids. I think it's important that we ask as parents, brothers, sisters, I think it's really important that we ask that question. It's had a huge effect on my life. They've had a huge effect on an awful lot of other people's lives. And the money's great. The money helps spread the word. But the awareness that these three brave dads have created within Westminster, as well as the rest of the country, has been absolutely fantastic. I take my hat off to all three of them.
Yeah, 100%. And there'll be lots of people listening to this who totally agree. So let's turn our attention then to that debate. And let's have a listen to, this is the Labour MP, Debbie Abrahams.
Unfortunately, our much-loved 20-year-old nephew, Jack, died when he took his life. Jack was a lot younger than his 11 cousins and was doted on by all. We will never know exactly why our Jack took his life. We miss him every day. We want to do all we can to prevent others from feeling suicide as their only way out of the pain that they feel, because it isn't. Thank you.
That was Labour MP Debbie Abrahams talking about a 20-year-old nephew, Jack, who took his own life. She said he'd been treated for severe acne, and his family want more awareness of the dangers of groups of drugs that he was taking. And it made me, actually knowing that we were going to have this conversation, made me reflect on losing a friend of mine when I was in sort of 19, 20. And I suppose, Tim, it's a reminder when we talk about school, but we're not just talking about children who are at school, but it's about trying to give people the life skills long term.
Absolutely. It's if we start the children early and saying, sometimes, especially in primary school, you don't want to use the suicide word. You might want to use if you don't feel like being here. That's a really gentle way of approaching it. We've seen lots of parents do that. But if we can get those life skills in as they go, especially off to university, because that's a massive step in loads of people's lives. And we hear lots from university students that, we met the lady this morning coming out to the hotel whose daughter had lost friends at university to suicide. So it's about giving our kids the best chance, so when they have those thoughts, those very, very dark thoughts, they know how to handle them and they know where to turn to.
It might be touched a bit on the impact of lockdown, but what's happened over the last 2-3 years in terms of those key life moments, building friendships, going to university, but then finding, not quickly building those sort of support structures and all that sort of thing. Again, it's those life skills that go on afterwards as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's many factors that lead to suicide, obviously, but I think some of the most powerful stories, just going offline slightly here, that we hear are from those who've struggled, who have basically been in despair, and in many cases have attempted to take their own lives, but now are living lives they want to. Yeah, that they are living lives. Each day might be a struggle. Each day, one day better than others. But they are living lives they want to, and if we can spread that hope as well, that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, 100%, Mike. It's good. It's a good message. Let's go back then to the debate from yesterday. This was which is obviously the man who matters in all this. Nick Gibbs, the schools minister, rounding off the debate and talking about the government's future plans to include more education on prevention in the curriculum. Let's take a listen.
We have brought forward the review of the RSHE statutory guidance, which was originally due to commence in September 2023, the review that is. The current content I have already set out on mental health and well-being covers a large amount of what is important in suicide prevention, but we will look further at this as a priority area for the review.
So that was Nick Gibb talking about looking further at... so this review, RSHE, if you're not aware, is Relationships, Sex and Health Education. Andy, what did you make of that response?
It's what we expected, I think, is the right way to put it. We appreciate... Now we've been involved with talking to government for a little while. Now we appreciate that things aren't going to happen overnight. What we heard in the debate were MP after MP after MP stand up and say, this is the right thing to do. And many shared, as you heard with Debbie Abrams, shared some very personal and emotional stories. So the message that Nick Gibb got, was it couldn't have been more powerful, and coming from his peers within in Parliament, the MPs that are sitting there. We appreciate that as a government minister, he was never going to stand up and say, yeah, that's a great idea, we're going to change it tomorrow, because it doesn't work like that. But the fact that the government have already brought forward the review, which was due to start in September, is now happening now, now. And he's talking about looking at suicide prevention as a priority topic within that review, speaks volumes. And we appreciate he's then got to go out and talk to experts and interested parties, whether that be charities or educationalists or suicide-bereaved parents. But we get the feeling that people are really pointing in the same direction now. So we're very hopeful this is going to happen sooner rather than later.
And Nick, I suppose this is an example of where Andy, Mike and Tim go through just an awful situation, come together, think, well, what can we do about it? Launch a petition, get 150,000 signatures, which means it gets debated in Parliament. So actually suddenly, that is a direct link between people previously not involved in politics at all, suddenly setting the agenda in Westminster and putting it on the table. And then, therefore, hopefully, the government will feel like it's got to react.
Yeah, I've been on petitions committee pretty much since I started as a member of Parliament, and it's fantastic. An awful lot of people get the issues that are important to them actually in front of a minister, and the three dads here, they've done a real good job, and it was a huge petition, 159,000 I think it was before it was closed. So yeah, they've had their day in Parliament, but as I say, with all the MPs and all the stories, it was. I don't think any minister can walk away from that and say that's not important. And I've got faith in Nick Gibb that he will do something with that.
Finally, then, what can people do now? What are you asking for people to do now? You've got them to sign the petition. They've donated money. If people are listening to this and thinking, I want to do something.
But keep the pressure on. So keep writing to your MPs, because we've got to shout loudly, as Daniel Craig said. We've got to keep the pressure on, because something else will come up in government and it'll get distracted. We are meeting Gillian Keegan, Secretary of State for Education, which is brilliant. She's written to us twice over the last couple of weeks, so we know we're going to meet her. And Andy's MP, Dr. Neil Hudson, raised a question in PMQs, and the Prime Minister's going to meet us as well. So everything is going in the right direction, but we need people to keep the pressure on Westminster. They're the people that make the decisions, so it's vitally important that they do that.
Actually, one thing as well, we should say, one thing you can do is keep donating. If you look at our website, 3dadswalking.uk, there's a
that's what I was after.
There's a dirty great donate button on that. There's several donate buttons on that page. So press the donate button,
and all that money goes to Papyrus.
It all goes to Papyrus.
Yeah,
who do run this Hopeline UK, which is a crisis line for people who are struggling.
Yeah.
Or concern others who want help. But they also go out and teach people, and they go out and influence. So the chief exec was in Parliament with us yesterday and rattling the cages of the ministers. So, it's a great charity, but they need funding. So press the donate button.
Absolutely right. Mike, what's that web address again?
www.3dadswalking.uk.
Fantastic. Congratulations. Well done. Really good to see you. Really appreciate because I know you're busy and in demand. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your stories, but also just keep up the amazing work, because I know it is making a difference. Andy Airy, Mike Palmer and Tim Owen, 3 Dads Walking, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And MP Nick Fletcher as well, thanks for coming in and explaining how all that works. And if you've been affected by any of the issues we've been discussing, the Papyrus Hope Line, which we've been discussing, is open from 9 a.m. until midnight every day, and the number to call is 0800 068 4141. That's 0800 068 4141. 41. So you can either call the number or if you can, then go online and donate. Really good to see you, gents. Thanks very much for coming in.